Hi, I'm here with Watcher Dev and Scooby Drew. Dev, what do you have in store for us today?
Nancy Holder.
Why is he holding her? No, that's her name, Holder. So, what's she holding then? It's her name. She's not holding anything, except for tons of talent. Nancy is brilliant. Dev, do you want to fill us in on Nancy before we jump into your interview?
So today we are speaking with Nancy Holder. She's a New York Times bestselling author, 7-time winner of the Bram Stoker Award, one of the most definitive writers of the Buffy and Angel books ever. I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for doing this, Nancy. This is a real honor for me. I'm so excited. I feel like I've known you for such a long time through your books and creativity. You're a winner of 4 Bram Stoker Awards.
7.
7. Wow. You're a winner of 7 Bram Stoker Awards.
Yes, I am.
Before you were a writer, you were a ballet dancer in German. Are you of German descent?
No, I'm Norwegian. What happened was if you could see me from top down, I'm not built like a typical American ballet dancer. I have a very long torso and short legs. And I had a German ballet teacher at the time, and she told me you would have a much better chance of moving to Europe because every European city has an opera company, and the opera company has a ballet company. So you dance in all the operas and have ballet nights. And so she said, you have a much better chance of getting a job if you move to Germany. And so I did. I was still going to ballet school when I moved. So I never actually was a professional dancer in Germany.
You've written for Wicked.
Mm-hmm.
You occasionally teach courses on Buffy. Do you still do that?
No, in fact, it was kind of frustrating. The last class I taught at UCSD, well, I was also in the lit department, but when I taught Buffy, it's interesting because when Buffy first came on the air, the internet was still kind of new. And there was the Bronze, and there were these different groups that started forming fan clubs online. That was really new. But by the time I taught at UCSD, it was just a thing. And very few people actually signed up for my class, but they were broadcasting all the lectures and everything to their friends. So everybody was watching, but they weren't paying for it. And so I didn't have that many students. So it was kind of weird, but in a way it was fun because people would say, oh, my friend's mom said this, or I said so-and-so told me that about the show. And so that was fun, but it was awfully weird to be knowing that while I was talking to this room, it was going to filter out. So I didn't have 120,000 students, however. So it was manageable.
Can I ask, you were in the first generation of people to write books on Buffy. Were you one of the first people to actually do it?
Yes. Yes, Christopher Golden and I wrote the very first original Buffy novel. And we also wrote the guidebooks, the Watcher's Guides 1 and 2. The show did not have a show Bible to give us when we started work. And so they told us they were using the Watcher's Guides. So what happened was I had heard that there was going to be a show on. I figured it out what it was. And I contacted Chris and asked him if he wanted to write together. And then I found out from a friend there was an auction for the rights to make the books in New York with the different publishers. So I contacted one of the people who was in the auction, and she said I didn't get it, but this is who did get it. And it was Lisa Clancy, Simon & Schuster Pocket Books. And so we faxed her 13 ideas. And she said it was the quickest green light she'd ever gotten because they needed an original novel right away. So what happened was then the showrunners and the show, the production company, have to approve the literary writers. So it was like this. Here's San Diego, here's New York, and here's LA. It would go boing, 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 like that. So we very rarely at first talked to LA. And so we got the go ahead and we got one of our ideas approved, and we had 3.5 weeks to write it. So,
oh my God.
So we got 5 scripts FedEx to us, and of those 3 were written by Joss. So we specifically looked more closely at his scripts, and we noticed they had this odd way of talking, and we called it Slayer speak. It was weird. And we made a dictionary. Then we flipped a coin because we had a very just detailed outline. We flipped a coin. One of us took the even chapters and one of us took the odd chapters. So chapter 1 got started, chapter 2 got started, we swapped and we kept swapping. And our rule was you cannot go backwards. You cannot edit what I did. You have to take what I did, work with that and move forward because we only had 3.5 weeks. So we found out later that there was an office pool in the book world about whether or not we're going to make our deadline. And we did. And so I think that's why we got so many more projects together and with other other people. I've done 48 Buffy and Angel projects. So, so a lot of Buffy and Angel. Yeah.
What was the first book you did?
It was called Halloween Rain.
Halloween Rain. Yeah, I have that book. It's a great book.
Well, we made a big boo-boo, which is that we put pumpkins in the old world, but we think it's not fair because we were pretty sure a watcher told us that. And so watchers, you got to be careful with your details because we take them to heart. So we did mention they had pumpkins and we got kind of slammed for that. But other than that, it was a crazy 3.5 weeks.
When did the novelization stop? Was it season 1 or was it
just as it came on the air? And in fact, while we were working, it had not yet aired. And so we were like all excited. We didn't know what anything was going to look like. We would get stills and we researched it and we would find all the actors and what they looked like. And as I say, there was no show Bible. So we depended on the scripts and the book was in before the show came on the air. And yeah, I was so excited because you probably know there's a horror bookstore, all-purpose horror store in LA called Dark Delicacies. And I went up and I wanted to tell somebody that I was in the running for this, but I didn't want to say anything. So I bought the soundtrack to the movie and I played it constantly, like good luck, good vibes, hoping that we would get the green light. And we did. So that's how I got started. And it was before the show aired is when the first book went in.
So then when you saw the show, did it change how you were thinking?
Yeah, but to be honest, I was just so high because I was so excited. I loved it. I felt like I got it. It was a California show. I just started crying. I was just so excited and so happy that we got this gig. I'm pretty sure it was only the second, what we called tie-in work that I had. The first tie-in novel I ever wrote was for Highlander. And so it turns out, well, long story about that, but there's a sort of a begats like in the Bible. One of the main producers on Highlander was a Buffy fan and he worked on Teen Wolf. And so Sarah Michelle Gellar got involved in the werewolf stories after all of that happened. But part of the reason I got my Teen Wolf job was because I had written for Buffy and they were Buffy fans. But yeah, I was really excited. And when I saw it, it always looks different from how you see it in your head because it was still cloudy. We still weren't sure what everything was going to look like. So it was a big, almost like a lesson. But I was exhilarated on that first night when it showed. It was one of the high points of my career, really. I'm going to start crying again. But anyway, it was great. Super great.
Did any of the writers ever get back to you about the books or how did you get any feedback?
Over time, yes. Not at first, just like it's been approved. We went up later, Chris and I together, me with other writers, Jeff Marriott and Mary Elizabeth Hart, me by myself. I always thought of the writer, me or another Buffy tie-in writer, as part of a department. So I went to a department meeting with all the heads of the departments, and they would go through the script page by page. And for example, costuming would say, Sarah wants a costume change. Or somebody would say, okay, if we're going to have this graveyard scene here, we need to do this. And so I would listen to this, and I thought, I'm kind of like a department of my own. And so I always thought of it like that we writers were to serve the show. And we had to do what the show does. And it was not up to us to bring in a new vision of Buffy. We were doing more of rather than more than, because it was not up to us. It was not our thing. And I really got into it because it would be like a guessing game. I was going to tell you later, but there was a number of times where I second guessed something and couldn't do it because the show was going to do it. So I'd go, okay. I wrote a novel called Blood and Fog, and it was going to be about the first. And so they said, you can't write about the first. At first they said, okay, go ahead. And so I started writing, I'm going to write about the first. I'm so clever. And then somebody said, you know what? We're going to do the first. And I'm like, oh, so I had to change my bad guy. So it became Jack the Ripper. But it was the first at first. And then I had a novel called The Evil That Men Do. And it starts out with a kid taking a rifle to school and shooting people. I turned it in 2 weeks before in the United States, we had Columbine, which was one of the big first school shootings. And I was watching the news and it came on. I have to confess, the first thing I said was my book, my book. And it turned out later that a friend of mine's daughter was there at Columbine.
Wow.
So I felt really ashamed that the first thing I thought of was my book. But Simon & Schuster had an emergency meeting, I suppose, with the Buffy people, and delayed that book by a year, and I had to rewrite the opening. which I completely agreed with. It'd feel hot, like, oh, I thought of this, or here was something that was happening. There was another book, I can't remember which one it was, but it starts out with a fire. And when I was writing it, I got evacuated during a fire in San Diego. I'm like,
Wow.
okay, I'm going to write that Buffy wins the lottery. So those were kind of some of the weird things that happened. And some of it would be feedback. I got told I could not kill Kennedy. I wanted to, and stuff like that. And the biggest one was my second to the last of the recent novels was Queen of the Slayers. And it was supposed to be what happened to Buffy and the gang after they get back on the bus after the end of the show. Well, the comic book series. I'm like, what are you doing to my novel? So it was Buffy and all the things that I thought might happen if the show or the world continued. A lot of it was wrong, but I kept very good track of what was happening on Angel and when Buffy and Angel would go back and forth. And so anytime they say, she's in Tibet, I figured out how they could be in Tibet. And so I was proud of the effort, but it's not canon anymore because of the comics. So that was pretty funny. You just wait, like every once in a while. I remember we both, Chris Golden and I called each other, his name is Liam. We never knew that before. Yeah. So every once in a while, there'd be a little surprise.
So you're a dancer. How did you become a writer?
It's weird because when I was a little kid, my father my maiden name is Jones. And so he would say, wouldn't it be funny if you became a writer and you would say, my pen name is Nancy Jones, because everybody would believe it's a fake name because it's Jones. So it became this joke in my family. And then people started saying, well, you should be a writer. Like they'd forgotten that it was a joke. And so I was writing little stories and writing little books and doing all kinds of things. And somehow I got more into ballet. And so there's an old music group called Jefferson Airplane or Jefferson Starship. And one of the main singers in that group and composers is named Grace Slick. And Grace Slick was going to have an art show in San Diego. And I was listening to her interview on the radio. And the interviewer said, well, isn't it amazing to you that here you are, this famous singer and composer, and you are having an oil painting show? And she said, no, it's not unusual at all. It's the arts. I'm good at the arts. So that's what I tell people. I'm good at the arts. But it was kind of devastating when I realized I wasn't going to be a dancer. I got injured. It was in Germany, and I couldn't bring my leg up to get on the streetcar to go home. And so I had to walk like 5 miles home. I thought, this is the stupidest way to make a living I can think of. And I quit. At least back then, the average lifetime of a dancer was you retire around 35. It's sort of like a football player. And so it was going to be a short career anyway. But for years, I had stress dreams where I would have one more chance and say, if you want to be a ballet dancer, you have to decide right now. And so that was kind of part of that angst that kids have and adults have about their life was also how I felt about Buffy. She was on the ballet track and there was no getting off it. She had to do it and she didn't have a choice. So I always appreciated that about her, that she accepted the mandate, but she wasn't always very thrilled about it. And I remember feeling kind of, in a way, trapped about being a dancer because I put so much effort into it and so much of my life. But I started having these doubts. And then when I got hurt, I thought, no, I'm not going to do it. But it was hard to let go of it because I had sunk costs. It had been so much of my life and my plan. But I had already had this little, you're going to be a writer someday because your last name is Jones kind of thing. And so when I was in college, I just started writing. I wrote a romance novel that I never sold. I researched the heck out of it. It's the most beautifully researched novel that's never been published. But I learned how to do it by doing that. And I did write romance novels I wrote about 12 romance novels. And it was the romance novels plus Highlander that got me into Buffy.
Is she your favorite character to write, Buffy? Or who's your favorite character to write?
It's funny because as I look back on it, I always would tell people Xander. I would say, oh, no, Xander, because he's so flip and he's so funny. But really, the heart of it was Buffy, and it was heartbreaking. And the same way, may I say, that Drusilla was heartbreaking. She was a normal person. She had visions, but everybody on Buffy had something. And Angel drove her crazy, and she was stuck too. And so I think I feel more for the characters that seem like they've had a tragic arc, very tragic. And I know in the comics that Drusilla had quite a different set of adventures. But at the time, it was so sad that she was so wacko. He just drove her absolutely nuts. And if you think about it, what would happen to me if I became, hey, guess what? You're a vampire. What? So I felt like Buffy was the heart of the show, but a lot of the gothic beauty of Buffy would be in somebody like Drusilla. Buffy was very modern, and Drusilla was that dark shadows kind of taste. So it was a really smart thing to keep Spike and Drew in the story. Really smart. So I guess I would tell you, really, it was just that gestalt of tragedy, but accepting what you're supposed to do. Like in the last episode of Angel, he says, let's get to work. And you think, they're probably going to die. I love the ending of that show. I thought it was perfect. And so it said what Angel was about. And Buffy, let's get to work. Whether or not you make it through the night, let's do it. And that's really, really beautiful and sad.
In the Angels Chronicles, you did some episodes that were actual episodes. But do you get a script? Are you allowed to say, oh, I want to expand on this? What's the perimeters? Because you had that, I think, with a couple of the Angel ones, right? You had
Right.
3 or 4 episodes to cover.
In our world, we have lingo, like everybody else has lingo. So when we are taking something that is existing in script form or that's going to be broadcast and we make a book out of it, we call it a novelization versus an original novel. So those books are novelizations. Before Angel came on the air, I didn't know very much of anything. And I wrote a book. I think it got published. I wish you'd know this, but it was called City of. And it was Angel's origin story. And I didn't know anything, so I made it all up. And my editor said, it breaks my heart to tell you this, but we can't publish this. This is not the canon, and this is not what Angel is going to do. So I had to rewrite it. But in the novelizations, we kept to exactly the dialogue, for example. And back in those days, I feel like, back in those days, we would watch the episodes. We, meaning me and Chris or me and Jeff and Mary Elizabeth, whoever, just watch the episode when it was broadcast. And we would literally take the script we had and hand edit it. So if somebody had said something different on the broadcast, we could change it. And we would get copies of the VHS tapes from the production company, and they charged our publisher $25 or $35 per tape, which we always thought was so funny. So we would tape it ourselves, but just in case, if we couldn't get a good copy or something happened while we were recording our VCR, we'd get a copy from New York. So it was back to that New York, LA, New York, San Diego. And they, just for fun, the bookcase that they used at the production office to keep the VHS tapes in was from the library, the original library in Buffy. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. And we'd make absolutely sure that they were perfectly in sync with what was broadcast. And then we would write the novels based on that. So we never changed a word of dialogue, ever. And we would keep all the scenes. Now, later on, we could do some interstitial stuff, like I would take Buffy's 3 birthday episodes and I would make a little story that would link all the episodes together. So it would be different birthdays, or something to do with Giles. That was 3 episodes of Giles. So 3 episodes would kind of make enough for a novel. Because, as you know, TV script is very short.
Yeah.
So if we kept to exactly what the script said, we'd have a 60-page book. So we'd want at least 180 pages. So we'd take 3 episodes at a time. And we never, at least my group, we never deviated from the dialogue and from the scenes. We would make scenes in between, like sideways. But when the episode came out, it was like in stone for us.
I don't know if you ever read any of the Target Doctor Who books, but those were interesting because sometimes they would take a subsidiary character's point of view who was sort of watching the events, and the Doctor would arrive and the adventure would happen. Would you given any leeway to do anything like that?
I'm trying to think about, in the novelizations, I don't think that we took that route. I think that if it appeared to be a Spike point of view, we stayed with Spike. If it appeared to be a Xander point of view scene, we kept him. But when we wrote the original novels, we bounced all over. We just wrote a novel.
What was the pitch process like?
I'm laughing just because once you've gone through it, you're like, that was crazy. We would just say, what about if Buffy did this and this, and then Xander did that, and then would that be okay? Yes. No. Okay. Would this work? No, you can't do that because we're going to kill that character. Oh, okay. So it would be just, we would write like after a while, because all of us writers in my little batch, we were known at that point. So we could pitch like a quick pitch, almost like a log line, maybe a paragraph, and that would be enough to get going. The person who vetted most of our books at the time was named Caroline Callis, and she had been an assistant to Sandy Gallen. And so she had come in from Sandy's side, and she would read the books and approve them or say, you need to change this. One of my first notes was, and I don't know if she said this, I just got the note. It said, Buffy wouldn't say that. And I said, well, what would Buffy say? And they said, you're the writer. I'm like, okay. And at the beginning, they said, why can't Buffy drive? And I said, because you said she can't drive. Oh, okay. And then why doesn't Buffy use a cell phone at one point? So we talked about the weird vibes of the Hellmouth, how she couldn't use a cell phone because she never had a cell phone, maybe once. She had a pager. And so we just say, it's up to you, But the thing that I have come to realize is when you're watching a show and it's going by so fast, it's very visual, you're not rare is the person who goes, why isn't she driving? But if it's in a book, it's more solid and it's more concrete. And I think that you have time to pause and go, wait a minute, why didn't she just call Angel on the phone? But it's been established in the show that she can't. So we would go with the rules of the show. And sometimes Caroline or somebody in the process would say, well, why didn't you do this? Well, you can't. Oh, right.
What was your research process like? And did it get easier as it went on or harder as it went on?
The thing was that I and others with me used a lot of historical things in our books, like slayers from Greece, or I had Catherine de' Medici in a book, and we researched the heck out of that stuff. And I remember I had two really good friends. They were married, and I was in France, and we were on a trip, and we were in a museum, and the husband was very snobby. And I said, oh my God, there's a saddle of Catherine de' Medici. I'm researching her for Buffy right now. And he said, oh, you research those things? And I thought, you have no idea how much research we do. And we would go back and watch episodes to make sure we got something right, or that the chronology made sense, or that we were playing fair. They were really heavily researched. Part of that is because of the respect we had for the show. The average day of somebody who's working on a show is 12 hours. It's not 8 hours. And people work hard. When I would be up there in the production offices, I would stay as late as I could because I only had a limited amount of time to be there. And I can remember going in, it'd be like 11:30 at night. The department heads would be in their offices and they'd be getting stuff for me. And it was amazing how hard everybody worked. They loved that show and they wanted to give them their best. So we wanted to give our best too. So our best would be researching and making sure we were absolutely solid that what we were doing was playing fair with the expectations of the fans and of the production company.
What was your most successful book? What was the book you're proudest of? What one do you think is like, I really got to something?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I don't know.
Name some of the ones you love that you really love.
Right. Well, I did love the Gatekeeper trilogy, and I did love Child of the Hunt. Those were really early, sort of classic Buffy. I had gotten a gig teaching at the Maui Writers Retreat, which was a big, very shishi thing in Maui. And it was my first time there. And I had been assured I would have time to write. And it was a grueling, very hard teaching job. And I was getting very panicky because I was so tired. And I thought, how am I going to write at night and get this book done? It was a Buffy book. And I went to another writer who was teaching. His name is John Saul, Saul. He's a horror writer. And I said, I'm freaking out. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm on deadline and I'm here. So he said, okay, were you the kind of person in college who would write your paper the night before it was due, even though you had the whole quarter to do it? I said, yes, I was. He goes, how many chapters long is your book? I said, 18 or whatever. And he goes, okay, you have 18 term papers to write. And I got my book done and I turned it in and it was successful. So it was like, whew, thank God. I really liked that book because I put part of my life in it. I gave Buffy the Slayer before her and how that Slayer died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was from Japan. And so she was not Japanese, but I grew up on a Navy base. Part of my life, I lived in Japan. My dad was in the Navy. And so I got to put that in. Her name was India Cohen. And a lot of the stuff in that book is wrong, but it was from the heart. And so I would say that's one of my favorite books.
What's the name of that book?
The Book of Fours.
The Book of Fours.
Because in it, there were 4 slayers.
I feel like it's so interesting how art and ourselves crosses. I just watched an interview with Francis Ford Coppola, and he said something you said earlier, which is he started saying, every film I make becomes my life. Like my life runs simultaneously along the track. Did you, I mean, obviously you got feedback from the writer. Did you ever get feedback from the actors about what they thought about how you were writing them?
Allison Hannigan and James Marsters were in Dark Delicacies, the bookstore where I was signing, and they were being made up as vampires. And this was the very first time Allison was done up as a vampire. They were going to go to a Halloween party. And so everybody was all entranced with the idea that she was a vampire, which I think helped get her later on. And she had very sweetly gotten this article, and she put little happy faces next to my book, my little reviews that I had gotten. And it was really, really sweet. And I treasure that. And there were all kinds of funny pictures of Spike. He's got some word slashed into his chest, and he's holding a little baby, and it's just adorable. So was the book signing. And the bookstore had them come in and get made up. I think Todd McIntosh probably did it. So it was just a really wonderful thing. And it was very sweet of her to put the little happy faces in the reviews.
It sounds like an amazing period of your life, a very happy period.
It was totally awesome. I would wake up, I'm just a person, and I'd wake up and get my coffee and open the door to my house and go, oh, the new script has arrived. And people would say, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I'm doing this thing. And it was really cool. We went on set, and I went on location, and it was just really cool. My college degree is in communications. So part of it was supposed to be film and TV production, but my major really didn't cover that very well. And so I have always liked all the nerdy minutia of film production, because sometimes the actors would come over and say, are you bored? Isn't this boring? And I'm like, no, not really. I really like all the little tiny details. One of my favorite interviews was with Michael Gershman. He was the director of photography, and I'd asked him some pretty detailed questions, given that I'm a neophyte. And he was so happy that somebody was asking him about gels and aspect ratios. But I like all that weird stuff. I bought a book when I was in college about how movie theaters bid on movies. How do you get a movie in your movie theater? That's pretty nerdy. So it was already a world that I liked. And I used to think, oh gosh, I wish I'd been braver and tried to get into that world. But I knew I was a print writer. We did pitch some ideas, but nobody ever said a single thing about them. So it's like, never mind. And people would say, why don't you just write a best-selling movie? And I'd say, well, if you understand the amount of work, the lunches, the dinners, the everything that people in LA go through to get their careers and keep them going, you would not ask me that. I got my thing. It's my thing now.
Did they ever use any of your ideas in a script? Because with Big Finish, the audio company Big Finish does Doctor Who, a bunch of their stuff has shown up, and some of their stuff is actually canon now in the TV show.
That is cool. Yeah, I can't quite remember anymore, but we had created this thing called the Ghost Roads. And what they are is, if you've ever played Cluedo or Clue, you have these secret places you can jump from room to room. It was like that, only they were for ghosts or something. I can't even remember anymore. And I think they did mention that at some point in one of the stories. And in a funny way, I was a big nut about jazzercise, and Joyce goes to a jazzercise class. And I'm like, yeah. So I think, oh, somebody read one of my books. So I like that. And there were a couple little things like that. One time somebody was named Nancy, and I was hoping it was me, but who knows, that name Nancy is pretty common. But the jazzercise shout out was really sweet. Really like that.
That's pretty great. Can you talk about some of the metaphors you got to explore? Because basically the metaphor of Buffy is high school is hell. What did you get to explore and work through that was interesting to you in the books?
Well, I called one of the books, the book that I was writing about what turned out to be Columbine was called The Evil That Men Do. And so that was a riff, and the evil that men do oft lives after them. And the trick of the story was that this wizard or something had magically poisoned the water and made people violent. But the most violent kid in the whole story didn't drink any of the water. He was just violent. So good. So he had to live with that he couldn't blame it on anything, so to speak. And so it was kind of like there's an Angel episode where this demon is saying, help me. And it turns out that he's possessed by this other demon. And it was kind of like that. Like, what do you do when you find out you're really bad? You're a bad person. So that was a big thing with me. In Child of the Hunt, I called Princeton University because we were using The Great Hunt and we wanted to use The Elf King. And there's a famous poem that's been put to music by Goethe. And so it turned out, as I'm learning, going in my writing career, different publishers own different translations of foreign languages. And so I had picked this poem and Princeton held the copyright for the translation. So I called Princeton and I said, hi, I'm writing a Buffy the Vampire Slayer novel and I want to use your poem. What do I do? And she said, oh, well, you have to fill out a form and send us $50. And when did you need that? And I said, well, like right now. And she said, oh, well, it usually takes at least 6 months. I'm like, shoot. She goes, you know what, though? I'll do it for you if you get it to me by X time today. So I faxed it to her. And I'm like, yes. And so it got in. So stuff like that was pretty cool. And so those kind of ideas we would riff off. To us, the writers, although Buffy was often very lighthearted and funny, it was deeply important to us to honor it because there's a lot of content in Buffy, a lot of depth.
What was it like for you as a child? Was high school hell for you?
I went to 3 high schools because my dad was in the Navy. And the last high school, I actually dropped out and went to Germany. And then, unfortunately, my father died. And so I came back and I came back for his funeral. And then I was going to go back to Germany. And I had a stepmother. And she said, you were so miserable there because I was very, very homesick. So she made me finish high school. What? Now I laugh like, oh, I have to finish high school. But I managed it. But right there, I felt like the door might be closing on my ballet career because in ballet, you have to get good real soon. And so here I was wasting my time in high school. And then we moved and I went to my 3rd high school and it was like always the new kid. So yeah, it was not the best. I actually kept going to ballet classes. So I'd get done with school and then I'd go to the ballet studio and I used to take ballet like 6 hours a day after school.
Was that in San Diego?
Yes. Yes.
A lot of Buffy is Santa Barbara, really. Do you think it is Santa? I mean, there is.
Yes, I do. Yes, definitely. Yes. In fact, one of the maps that we got to see had something on it that revealed that it was Santa Barbara.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like,
Because when you're there, it looks like it. We actually just interviewed Nerf Herder, the band, and they're from Santa Barbara, and they said that a lot of the shots of roofs and places is Santa Barbara.
Right.
What do you think separates it from other shows, Buffy? It is a mythology, it is a fairy tale, but it has resonance. Why is that?
One of the first things that shocked me when Buffy came on the air was that she hit another woman. She hit another girl. She smacked her. I'm like, oh my God. And I realized then that that was true equality because, for example, there was a commercial on at the time, and I don't remember what the product was, but there was a tug of war between girls and boys, like teenage boys and teenage girls or young adults. And the women won. And a friend of mine said, oh, like, right on. I said, well, it's kind of obvious they had to win. Given the times, they had to win. And I wasn't impressed. It was like, now that I'm older, I'm like, that was pretty cool. But at the time, it was like, well, duh, of course they have to win because that's the times we're in. But Buffy was snarky and snide and she hit other girls. And it just seemed like it was more authentic. And I guess that's what people really respond to. It doesn't feel like, let's put on a show and get all these people to buy stuff at the commercials. Like when I watch football and when Matthew McConaughey is in these commercials, where he's explaining to everybody, oh, the reason they want us to watch football is just to buy the fast food in between in the commercials. And they're like, it's not true. So a lot of people would say that a show is just to deliver you to the next set of commercials. But Buffy was authentic. Everybody who I ever talked to who worked on Buffy was not there just because it was a job. I mean, I talked to Marty Noxon and she started crying that she had gotten this Buffy job. And people would say, my agent told me not to work on Buffy, that it was going to be this genre show. It wasn't going to last. And I just had to do it. And that was how everybody was. I never met anybody who said, well, it's a gig. it just has an aura of we mean business. We're really serious. This is from our heart. And I think that communicated really beautifully. It's more than a commercial production. It's lightning in a bottle. It's just something that happened that was amazing and that spoke to people because it was real.
David Greenwald brings a tremendous amount to Buffy as a writer. Did you ever interact with David at all?
Yes, in fact, I'm laughing because I'm on tape lying about my age to him. And my co-author caught it and he goes, "You just said that you're younger than you are." I'm like, "I did?" And he goes, "Yeah, you did. You said you were X and you're this old." But yeah, he was fabulous.
Judith's off camera, but she just wanted to say hi.
Hello.
Nancy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm so excited that you're doing this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I love your work so much. It's amazing.
And vice versa,
Thank you.
She said some lovely things about you, Juliet.
as should be said.
I know the fans are just going to go nuts for this interview.
Thank you.
What's the most Buffy books you wrote in 1 year?
Gosh, I don't know. Somebody asked, how long does it take to write a book? And it was exactly as long as we got. So the shortest was 3.5 weeks. I'd say maybe 2 or 3 months per book. So maybe 4 books. Sometimes I would get like a Sabrina book or do something else different. I am a horror writer, or have been a horror writer. So I might have been working on something. It wasn't Buffy related. In my heyday of Buffy, I just wrote Buffy, Buffy, Buffy a lot. And I can't really tell you how many books per year it was. You know, it's funny because I was interviewing people. We did a Buffy the Vampire Slayer encyclopedia and a guide for slayers, Demons of the Hellmouth, and all these things more recent.
You obviously have such an incredibly vivid and creative imagination. Is it harder for you or less interesting for you to write like an encyclopedia because it's more almost factual? Do you like to just be like, let my imagination go?
No, it's a different process, but it's still Buffy. So the fact that it was still being in the Buffy universe made it as cool as ever. And it was funny because, as I was saying, being so nerdy, I was teaching it's called Odyssey, and it's a program for science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers. And you get a writer in residence. That was I. At night, I was working on the Demons of the Hellmouth. It's a handbook for slayers. And I kept seeing this in my head to say who all the demons were and all the vampires. And I kept getting this one picture and I could not figure it out. So I emailed a super fan friend of mine, Marianne Jenkins, and she said, "Oh, that's so-and-so from episode blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "You know that." And so she stumped the Stoops. And it was just fun because it was still Buffy. So I didn't care. It was whatever I could get, I was happy to have.
Which character do you think that you wrote grew the most as a character?
You know, it's funny because a lot of people say Willow because she went through so much and she went over the moon and back. And I have to say that I honestly think Xander, I think that he, even though he seems kind of static in a funny way, I think he grew the most. And I think that because there's the episode, The Potential, where Dawn thinks she's going to be a slayer and it turns out she's not. It's a different girl. And he says, "We're the ones who stand on the sidelines and we're the ones who watch," which is ironic since he lost his eye. But he accepted his mission. And at the time, we all felt like Xander was a true lieutenant. You say it, I'll do it. Of course, he did cause a few problems by lying, but he was a stalwart character. And I would say the obverse of that is Spike, that Spike also grew like crazy. He kind of becomes old Spike again when he's on Angel. He's more like the old Spike we knew and loved. But, you know, when he went through his rituals and his suffering to get a soul, and he loved her so, and at the end, he and he alone stands up for her. So I would say those two guys. Most people pick Willow or Buffy, but I think those men really did come through. And we talk about a lot about female empowerment, but there's a lot of male empowerment too. Men get a bad rap sometimes, over there, they're misogynistic and they're jerks and la, la, la. But to become a feeling, heartfelt man is a big journey, especially in like the United States, where you got to be macho and don't show your feelings and all this. And so there's sort of a vulnerability about Spike and Xander. And other characters like Riley, who became, I don't want to say soft, but they had more parts than a lot of male characters are written. And it was really beautiful. So I would say that.
What's your take on the difference between Angel and Angelus? What's it like to write both of those characters?
Angelus was like when you're having a really bad day and you want to say all this crappy stuff to people, but you don't. And he just said things and did things. He was horrible, but it was kind of gleeful. It was gleeful to watch because, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that. He was mean. He was so mean. And I know David Boreanaz said that he really liked playing Angelus. He was so heartfelt when he was Angel, and then he was so mean when he was Angelus. So I think it was a huge arc for him. And it was really incredible to watch him go back and forth. And I thought it was funny that he's evil because he's smoking.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, what a bad person.
The last time you wrote Buffy was in what year? Like 2019?
I should peek, but the last things I did were the Buffy the Vampire Slayer Encyclopedia, and I think that's the most recent.
Christopher Golden did a book called Pretty Maids All in a Row.
Yes.
And I really like that book. It's very interesting because Drusilla, to me, you have to get the voice right. Like, there's a logic to her illogic.
Exactly.
And you have to understand how to place that. When you write a character who doesn't ever say anything in a straightforward way, how do you go about that?
Well, I think part of what happens is to me, it's a cheat to say, well, that person was crazy. That's why they did it. They were crazy. Well, that's not valid because somehow they got crazy or something made them crazy, or they do have an underlying logic of their own. So you can't be lazy and just say, well, they were just bad and crazy. You have to say, how does that work? There's a system. I used to be into linguistics. There's a deep structure to this. And there's a reason that this person chose to do that and chose to do that, even if they are crazy. My father was a psychiatrist, and he used to tell me he would come home and he would have told a patient who was crazy, just act normal. And sometimes that's all it took. Just pretend you're normal. And they go, oh, okay. Don't forget, you're normal now. Just don't forget. Just act that way. And they go, okay. And then they'd be okay. So the idea that we're so influenced, and I think people who are in a crazy state are extremely wounded and vulnerable. I mean, look at Drusilla. So I liked in the comics when she got her Dark Queen thing going, but there has to be a logic to it because you can't just have them do nutty stuff, because that's just like having a magic system with no rules, and that's not fair. If you have, oh, well, it's because I'm magic, I can do that, and I'm magic because I can do that. Well, there have to be limitations or rules or costs or something, or otherwise it's so random it's not interesting.
I really loved in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, where Heath Ledger's character said, I'm like a dog that chases a car. I wouldn't know what to do if I caught it. That's terrifying character, isn't it? He's not really looking for an end game.
Yeah, to know that about yourself, that is nuts.
Would you say you're an autodidactic person? Because you barely finished high school, but you're so intelligent, you're so well-read, and you're so passionate, and you've taught university classes. You have an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and creativity.
I do. I love Italy. I'm very into Italy, and it's very handy because they call me Midnight. He is born and lives in Italy now. A lot of the story takes place in Italy, and because of the mafia, there's an Italian connection. I've been to Italy numerous times and absolutely adore Italy. And I discovered that George Eliot wrote a novel about Renaissance Florence. It really doesn't have much to do with anything that I'm doing about Italy. And I'm actually, next time I go to Italy, I'm going to southern Italy, not Florence. And it was like this thick. And I thought, I am reading that. And I just finished it. It was like almost 600 pages long. It had a list of Italian words. It had notes. It had a list of all the actual historical characters in the novel and an introduction, and I read every piece of it. And I thought, you are such a nerd. I kept thinking, this is a waste of time because I have a zillion other books about Italy and they're waiting. But I thought, I cannot not read this. It's just really interesting. It wasn't really applicable, but it was interesting. So yeah, I would say, yeah, that's what happened.
How many hours a day do you write?
Well, right now, I have a writing partner named Alan Phillipson, and we are writing comic books. And right now, we're waiting for the art to catch up with us. So we're a little bit sitting around, and I'm going to work on a short story. And I've become very active with Sherlock Holmes, and I'm what's called a Baker Street Irregular. So it's like the Illuminati of Sherlock Holmes. So I do Sherlock Holmes stuff. But writing right now, we're mostly going, come on, and waiting to get to go. I just turned in something for a nonfiction project about Sherlock Holmes. So right now, I'm not working as much as I used to. I used to work all the time, and I would just figure out, okay, what am I going to do in the morning? What am I going to do in the afternoon? What am I going to do in the evening? So like in the morning, I would write. Or in the evening, I would edit. I usually edit when I'm tired. So I would do edits or copy edits or something like that. My advice to people who want to be writers is to understand, just as with people in LA who are in the industry, you really need to be driven if you want to have a real career. If you just want to write now and then and have stories published or publish a book once in your life, that's okay. And that's a legitimate way to go. To really be a full-time writer is a very hard road, just as with being an actor. You have to be looking for work. You have to be working. Some people, I have to write my book my way. Well, then you cannot be a tie-in writer. You cannot work the way I would work for Buffy. You have to be, yes, I will do what you want because you are in charge. I will make it work versus the other way. And what I will say, the biggest mistake that I see aspiring writers making is starting and stopping, starting and stopping, starting and stopping. You need a body of work. Even if you never sell it or show it to another person, you need to have done it, not started 15 things and never finished any of them. You have to learn how to get all the way through it to the end. And then you can say, yeah, I wrote a book. Yeah, I've written a short story. Yeah, I wrote an article about Buffy for IB Taurus publications in England. So you need to have a consistent practice. I'm into yoga. You have to do it. You can't just say, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to go to my writing group, and then I'm going to go to a writing conference. You have to actually sit down and do it. And frankly, a lot of times sitting down and doing is really boring. You're in a room all by yourself. Everybody else is decorating the Christmas tree or, going to the movie, and you want to go, but you have to sit down and work. You need to really be driven. I think a lot of people, you need grit and you need drive. If you don't have that, some people write a book and it's a huge bestseller and their life is set and they're really happy. And some of us have to write a lot, get rejected a lot, make a lot of revisions, say, yes, ma'am, okay, you got it, and just keep going. So that's my advice.
Ray Manzarek said about Jim Morrison that the latter part of Jim Morrison's life, he spent too much time in the bar talking about his songs he was going to write them, writing them.
Yeah. Sometimes even people who you think are your friends don't really believe that you will succeed or are a little resentful when you succeed. When I sold my first novel, I had a party. I had bagels and Manhattans because those were very New York to me. And so I got up on a chair and I said, the reason I'm having this party is I just sold my first book. And this guy goes, I just lost a bet. I thought, you jerk face. So, yeah. And so you have to get ready for that too.
What are you working on now?
Right now, I'm waiting for my artist, but Alan Phillipson and I, we actually just turned in our notes. The way comic books for us work is we write the script first, then the artist does sketches and has questions like, I'm not seeing why this guy would be doing X. Could you explain that to me? And so we just turn back our notes to our artist. And so we have two different series with two different publishers. For both of them, we're waiting on art. One of them is called Johnny Fade in Deadtown, and he's a noir detective, and he was corrupt when he died for various reasons. And it turns out he's in a sort of a purgatory called Deadtown, where people are stuck doing the same things they did.
Oh, so cool.
And only one person can call him back to Tinseltown. And then he has things he does in Tinseltown that affect Deadtown. It's very, very noir, and we watched every noir movie ever made. What a bummer of a gig, huh? And the other one, Alan actually created the character for an anthology we were in, and he thinks he might be a vampire, but he's not sure. He's somehow a spawn or something of Dracula. He's not sure what's happened to him, but he has all of Dracula's memories. He's kind of like Angel in the sense of that he's plagued with remorse, but he's plagued with remorse and shock for things he never did. And so he's trying very hard not to be a vampire, not to give in to the impulses that a vampire would have. And he's a mafia hitman. And it takes place in the 1970s. So, yeah, it starts out in Las Vegas in the 1970s, and then there are flashbacks. He acquires this family of vampires he takes care of so that he has something to hang on to keep human. So anyway, Alan came up with this idea and we sold it. It's called Call Me Midnight.
Call Me Midnight. If you had to choose 3 or 4 episodes of Buffy that you think everyone should see that inflected your writing of the characters, what would they be?
The Gift, The Body,
Yeah.
and Becoming 1 and 2. And that would probably be a good start. That would be a good
Yeah.
start. And The Harvest, the 2 first,
Yeah.
part 1, part 2 of the opening. And When She Dies, Prophecy Girl. I mean, that is, whoa. I have to say, the last episode, I got a beat sheet. I didn't get the script before it aired, and I just got a beat sheet. I knew it was going to happen. And I was so sad that it was over that I didn't watch the episode when it broadcast. I watched it later.
Oh.
I put a puzzle together and I kept track of the time, and I'd go like, okay, this is the first act. Okay. Second, I was just crying, and I just sat there doing my puzzle. I just couldn't watch it. I watched the last episode of Angel when it was on, but Buffy, I couldn't do it. And so then I just saw it later. I think I got the script later. I can't remember, but I did have a beat sheet and I knew it was going to happen. And I'm like, it's all over.
Nancy, this has been the most amazing interview. I've so enjoyed. I hope we get to talk again. I hope we get to meet each other. We'd love to meet you in person at some point. Thank you so much again, Nancy. I've so loved doing this with you. Take it easy. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
I've been reading the Book of Fools. Nancy is a wonderful writer. I agree.
I loved talking with her.
Yes, she didn't need to hold anything after all. Aside from her immense talent, I couldn't have said it better myself. I know. See you soon when we'll do it again. Do it again. Until next time, rewatch, revamp, reinvent, and be remarkable you.